It is Thursday, August 27th, and we are here with, I'm going to call it breaking news out of Australia, which maybe is not a thing that we hear too often in the cybersecurity world, but good news. The Australian Federal Police arrested 2 individuals associated with Team PCP. They're 2 of the more perhaps active members from what it sounds like. And Paul, love to hear your side of this in just a second. But just in brief, it's a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old. Reuben Thompson and the other suspect was identified by ABC's court reporting to be Lewis Gabler. What can I say? On one hand, play stupid games, get stupid prizes, F around and find out. But also, these are 2 incredibly young people. One has a history of drug abuse and employment problems. The other has gotten involved in some pretty nasty neo-Nazi stuff. Honestly, as a parent, I hate to see 2 young men having gone down this path. I hope that whatever comes next for them gives them an opportunity to decide to do something different with their lives. They're young and they have a lot of life ahead of them, hopefully, and I hope they've learned from this.
You and I are just so different in this regard. Like, we're both parents, right? And so I think that's an important thing but I am just so I have no sympathy for them. They're drug
don't
addicts.
Get me wrong. I have zero sympathy for them.
Okay.
What they did was incredibly wrong. But these are also it's sad to see. This is not your hardened criminal life of crime kind of thing. These are, as we've been talking about for several months, a couple of kind of dumb kids.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the theme running through today's show, which is just dumb kids. They just did a bunch of dumb stuff, which we knew we were calling out before they got arrested. But I think one take on that last part, or that first part there, before we move into the heart of today's conversation about these guys, is that, listen, I understand they're at the beginning of their lives, but they also come from what appear to be relatively well-off parents. They seem like mostly useless drifter type people. Listen, I was a 20-year-old man, right? That was trying to figure out, where I was. And you know what I did is I found a passion and I followed it and I became successful, right? So I don't know. Maybe I'm giving.
Well, no, I don't disagree with you because, I was reading Brian Krebs' article in detail, and I found Reuben Thompson's general attitude about the job industry to be, on one hand, understandable because getting into cybersecurity is not easy. But on the other, he acted like he didn't see an alternative. And I have a tough time with that. I know a lot of people who work hard to get into cybersecurity who have the same barriers that he may have had. They talk in the article about, if you don't have experience, employers won't look at you. There are a lot of ways to get experience.
Well, bad people like to latch on legitimate arguments like that to validate why they did what they did. And let me just start out by saying something super crazy, which is Jeffrey Dahmer, before he killed his first person, it was just a 20-year-old man who hadn't done anything, right? And the innate evil within him. And these 2 guys, I got no sympathy. Well, I know neither one of us has sympathy for him, but I hope they throw the book at him. Not only do I hope they throw the book at him, these 2 young kids are just going to, even in Australian prison, because both of them are white supremacists. That's the other thing you have. One of them, Casper, is more out there, but you look at some of the things that old mate Reuben has said. He comes from South Africa, and he comes from a I don't think he comes from a Boer background, but I think he comes from an Anglo background in South Africa and is very entrenched in that kind of white supremacist, Anglo nationalistic. And
yeah, they've said some pretty nasty things.
There's there's this growing movement, and I don't want to give it too much play here, but there's this growing movement called remigration, right? Which is just a fancy word for racist, white supremacist nationalists. And there is some overlap. Last night, a journalist was pinging me some stuff about some of the remigration things happening here. And there's a connection between that and some of these like South African folks. Anyhow, more to be discussed later on. Let's jump into the heart of this, Jen. Let's get her on.
Well, so where do you want to start with it? Because there's plenty to discuss from the Krebs article, from the AFP press release. I know you have been talking to people behind the scenes for multiple months, I want to say. So you kind of knew this was coming. What do you want to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I like, I was privy to some inside baseball, and I don't want to go into a lot of details because I don't want to be part of inside baseball in the future. Yeah, I want, but the reality is that I had some intel that one of these people was perhaps in my country, and some meetings took place because of that. But I think the first thing I want to start out by saying is that, listen, we were right. We called it, right? Like, basically, Team PCP is one guy, Reuben Thompson, right? 21-year-old from Cottesloe outside of Perth. It's a well-to-do suburb in Perth. He is South African, so all the intel about the South African part is true. And like, this is what happens. You said it earlier. F around and find out, right? Like, they prodigious posting on Twitter and Telegram and all kinds of other places.
Their OPSEC was terrible.
OPSEC is terrible. Reusing the same username and the same stupid password. Like, Krebs, just like the Krebs article is just brutal and it's efficient.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just like brutal and it's efficient teardown of how stupid these, I can't say any cuss words, but I really want to say that dip word. They're just morons, yeah. Right? And I think it's hard for us to reconcile the fact that they are so stupid and made so many mistakes with the fact that their attacks in March and April and May were pretty complicated. I mean, and yes, they were borrowing heavily on the original Shai-Hulud threat actors and, borrowing from the ecosystem, but it was effective because, it attacked a place where not a lot of people really kind of understood what was kind of happening. And we talk about that in the interview that we did with Akito and Socket and all those guys. The fact is that many of us use GitHub Actions every day, or the equivalent, just to be clear. Mm-hmm. And there's just a lot going on there that we don't really kind of talk about. There's just a lot of containers and stuff going on there. And they took advantage of that, right? And they were very effective. They weren't able to actually make any money. My understanding is they made about $90,000. Like, it just.
Well, the Krebs article says that Thompson made like 20K. So yeah. I mean, not sophisticated. I think this is a great example of how an LLM can get an unsophisticated bad actor further along than they would have been, but it can't make them. I mean, let's go back to our terminology from North Korea. It doesn't build a go-to-market for them. It doesn't build a business for them. You have to know how to do targeting and how to take advantage of the data that you get a hold of. And so the good news out of this is they're not, terribly smart about what they did collect. Let's just hope this is the last we've seen of this.
Well, yeah. And let's talk about that for a second. My understanding is that there's a lot more to come now. So what does that mean?
You mean around the not more malware coming, but more people getting in trouble or outed.
Law enforcement activity. Yes. And here's the thing is that aside from exploiters, who still is in the wind, Team PCP has been wrapped up. So what is there more to do about that, right? Like, I called it, this basically, I was saying Team PCP was like one guy, maybe a second helper, and that's exactly what we have here. Are there some other people ancillary around them? Of course, yeah. Like in Colonel Stub right now is out there just talking about how they turned themselves in and all this other shizzle. But the reality is it was relatively small.
Online right now.
Yeah. Oh my God. So many people like, I was in the know, and just God. some of the most toxic personas on Twitter, but which is the right place to be toxic. But the point I'm driving at it here is an important one, which is if there's more to come, and Team PCP has effectively been wrapped up with a few threads hanging out there. What's coming? And my expectation is that there is going to be movement against Lapsus and Shiny Hunters and some of these other groups, because there's enough overlap between some of these groups where, and I want to hope, meet Francois, you know, I'm talking about you, buddy. I'm hoping that something that what Francois and I worked on ends up doing some good out there. But you know, I think the reality is that there are going to be more arrests. There are going to be in other crews, and there's going to be kind of this domino effect. Sorry to use these cliche terms, but there's going to be a domino effect here where, like, once you get that much data from some, because they've already pulled, like, I heard in one of the things, 100 terabytes already off of old mate Ruben's machine. And, you know, as everybody knows, they stole just a ton, absolute ton of credentials. So, you know, just there's a lot of gold there. And based on the rest of their OPSEC, I'm going to guess that all this data was just sitting on their hard drives, which the AFP now has. And big shout out, by the way, to AFP. Not that they get back to people when they turn, anyhow, but that aside, a big shout out to AFP for working with the FBI to do this takedown. So good on them.
Yeah. Good news today. Okay. Let's talk.
Today's a good day, Jen. Today's a good day.
Today's a good day.
You and I have been talking about this day. Like, we literally have been talking about this happening for a while now. Like, we knew it was happening. We just waiting for the machinations to go through, and here we are. It's happened. Team PCP is effectively been taken down. That's awesome.
Yeah, very happy about it. Now let's talk about our favorite subject. And I only say that because I think we do talk about this just about every podcast, but that's because we're always finding new things. So this is what's going on with PolinRider. We are preparing to do a talk in a week and a half. And so we've been preparing for that and doing some extra hunts and found some interesting new things. Some of it is more like reinforcing that it is bigger than what the data was initially showing. Some of it is showing it went back further than what the data initially showed. We published a blog. I'll share the link in the comments that goes through a pretty interesting case study of a person who got, I won't even say reinfected because they never cleaned out the infection to begin with. But they got infected. They thought they cleared it out. It has been pushed into their packages. So maybe let's start there, and then you can open up into the broader hunt that you've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of this is the fact that you just have a lot of developers that have been compromised over the last couple of years. Contagious Interview from DPRK has been going on since 2023. A lot of people are compromised. The problem is that what we didn't really kind of talk about as much as we probably should have is the fact that the DPRK maintained persistence on these developers' machines. And that is rearing its head now as all these compromised GitHub users, they're compromised on their local machines. Their GitHub accounts aren't necessarily compromised, but they're compromised on their local machine. So the persistence is happening on their local machine. And what we're seeing now, we talked about this a couple episodes ago with Go. Every day we see a new smattering of PolinRider and Go packages because Go doesn't have an additional publish step like NPM or PyPy does. But we are now seeing PolinRider in PyPy. We're seeing it in NPM. We're seeing it in VS Code. We're seeing it in other places. As these developers, go about their daily business and they go to deploy a new NPM package or new PyPy package or whatever, the PolinRider malware slides through inside of that new thing. So in this particular case, the fetch page assets in HTML to Gutenberg maintainer, Diogo, was compromised, and NPM took down version whatever .9 of fetch page assets, but then immediately he published .10, .11, .12, .13. These are all legitimate pushes by the real Or actually, in those cases, Jen, I think that might have been DPRK.
No, they're all, well, okay, let's rewind a little bit. So
yeah.
Diogo is a legitimate developer who got compromised. We don't know specifically how he did, but probably given his profile of like an independent developer, is probably through contagious interview. It looks like it happened maybe around January of this year. And the way that this particular piece of malware works is, yeah, it's on your machine, but then it looks for places that it can inject its payload and then pushes them to your repos. And so that's what happened is through his normal CI processes, infected files were pushed into all of his repos. And then because two of those repos serve as source code for two corresponding NPM projects, when he pushed updates to those NPM projects, new versions, the malware came along for the ride. And that malware was discovered a few months ago. It got taken down relatively quickly. He went through some remediation steps. We can see evidence of that where he deleted the files that had the payloads in it, but he only did a partial job. He didn't delete the vscode-task.json files that were triggering those payloads. And we can assume he also didn't probably clean his machine, and we can look through his repos and we can still see evidence of infection in his repos. And whether he continued to push new versions or the threat actor, I would say it's probably him. He probably, was making updates to his packages. We can see this series of, updates coming out over the last couple months where he pushed a new version because he wanted to, have a non-malicious version. And then the threat actor was able to push a new payload onto his machine. And that is through the wrap that is undoubtedly on his machine, which then trickled its way back into his packages. And so May, I think, is when those original poisoned packages were published. They've each had a few versions come out since. They are all malicious. And I think the thing that surprised us was that nobody has caught this. This was a known compromised developer. Two known compromised packages. Not only did we not catch it, we'll own our own thing here. NPM didn't catch it, which certainly I would have hoped that they would have, since he should already be on their radar. But as you talk about in your blog, they're focused on the package as the important data point, not the individual. None of the other scanners seem to have picked it up either. So he has had this persistent infection for several months that has had evolved payloads. So no fun for him.
Yeah, and I think the timeline is important because each victim is a little bit different, because what happens is the infection starts on your local machine via a malicious Git repo that the payload gets run from typically from VS Code using the task function. Sometimes there's other alternative ways. Sometimes there's a Git hook, and other times you run the app, and when you run the app, it actually runs some system commands. There's a number of ways, but most of the time it's VS Codes. So you're compromised on your machine. And then what happens is that allows North Korean threat actors to manipulate files on your machine. They have access to your disk. And what they do is they go and look for all the Git repos that you've got, which you said earlier, and they find ones that match what they need, and then they push these payloads in. Now, the second part, this is where things sometimes change. If North Korea has access to your credentials, because when the info stealer that was part of that rat and part of that kill chain, when the info stealer runs, if they get access to your Git account via a pat or some other function, then what they do is they will then push. And so in Diogo's case, there were pushes that our system identifies as non-human. So basically what happened is DPRK orchestrated changes on his local disk to files that were inside of the Git repo. It then also orchestrated the push of those out, basically overwrite a commit and then push it out to GitHub. So those two things both were automated by DPRK. The third thing, which was not automated, which is the publish of the NPM package. Those were always Diogo himself doing those as part of legitimate work. He just didn't realize that his GitHub repo that was building the npm package had this, persistent payload sitting on top of it. And DPRK pushed 3 additional payloads into the Git repos. So the last one wasn't that long ago. It was just a few days. Well, it was about a week ago now. And that last one is NullReceiver. It's the latest version. It's got a brand new campaign marker. It's the best. And that's the problem with this, is that when DPRK has access to your machine and has a rat running there, they can keep pushing new, better payloads.
I mean, they're helping you out. They're giving you updates, right?
They're giving you the wrong updates. Yeah.
Wrong updates.
You want to pin their old version of their own malware.
We've been mapping their persistence mechanisms, and there's at least 4 separate persistence mechanisms related to this campaign. Some of it's in the original kill chain, some of it's PolinRider specific, but there is a new one that somebody in the community surfaced maybe a week or 2 ago, where they have now added a step in their kill chain where they overwrite the npm CLI with a malicious version of the CLI. That's a particularly nasty one. So even if you clear off everything else that we've been talking about for months, this little malicious npm CLI, the next time you fire up npm, will say reinstall malware, and it just kicks off the whole thing again.
If you find the Python or the JavaScript persistence, the rat, and you kill that, and you find where it's starting from a bash RC file or an npm RC file or wherever it is, if you kill that, if you get it out of there, if you go and look and find all the payloads and all your Git repos and get rid of those and actually remove them from your Git index, because just pushing a new version of it doesn't mean that the payload's gone. It just means you've got a new version that doesn't have the payload. If you do all those things alone, but you don't uninstall or delete npm, you're going to get reinfected, because the next time you run npm, it's so basically the normal size of npm, which by the way is just npm CLI is just basically a bunch of like symlinks to different JavaScript files, most of which end up in a CLI folder inside the npm. Anyhow, it's crazy. Why would you do that? But it's JavaScript. They overwrite that 200 byte file with a file that ends up being something like 1,000 K or something. I think it's 1,100 K or something like that. But it's and some people, we didn't even do this. Some people out there in the wild have created tests for some of this stuff. So and we've pulled that into our blog and also shouted out to them too as well. So there's some really simple things you can do to look at the size of your npm file, for example. Just make sure you're following the symlinks. So if not, then not going to work.
Yeah, the other thing that you said you've been observing is, so there's 2 kinds of files that this malware will create on your machine or modify on your machine. We've talked extensively about the task.json files. We are still seeing lots of ones that are config files, JavaScript or TypeScript config files. And Paul, you said that initially they tended to save those in index, but now you are seeing them all over the place, that they're just spread, and it's not, 3 or 4 different types of files. It's really just any kind of config. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about what you've been observing.
Yeah, good call out. So in the original version of PolinRider from March of 2026, basically what happens is in that part of the kill chain where their malware is going and looking for JavaScript files to write into, it was only looking for 5 or 6 files, vite.config.js and a babel.config.json, and just a very small number. And then that number grew over the next couple of months, and they were looking for like 15 or 16 different files, and if they'd find that, they would just append their payload on the end of it. Well, now they're just looking for any JavaScript file. And what they're also doing, Jen, is they're looking for files that are actually getting used as part of the execution order for that particular project. So that's what's smart about it, is that they don't just go and find some like random JavaScript file. They basically look at the code and really briefly take a look at kind of how the call process works. And then they find a JavaScript file that's actually going to get called, and they drop it into there. So we're now seeing
reachability.
Yeah, exactly. It was really, really well. It's very simplistic reachability, but that's funny. But So we're seeing it now in all kinds of stuff. So basically, this is one of the things. This is why our hunt keeps growing. Is that we had that original 5 or 6 files they were looking for. Then we had like the 10 or 8 or whatever, and then it was grew and grew. And now we just look for any types. Here's the extensions you want to look for: .js, obvious. Excuse me. .ts, TypeScript, also probably should be obvious. Then all the minified and the ESM and common JS files, CJS, MJS, and that whole kind of thing. So there's like 5 or 6 extensions you want to look for, which means that your searching now is going to be longer. It's going to be more. It's going to take more time because you're looking through a lot more files. But that's what you got to do. And when we're doing that now in GitHub out there forward hunting, we're just finding a lot more files. I pushed 1,200 or 1,400 new GitHub repos to OSM just yesterday, one day.
You said something that gives me an opportunity to get up on my soapbox, and I know you're going to join me up on it. Because this takes so much time, this is not just about cleaning your own stuff and worrying about yourself. For every minute, hour, day that you're going through incident response, if you have public repos, if you're collaborating with anyone, the infection is spreading to your network. And I know that disclosures suck. Nobody likes to do that. But if you found that you've been infected, please, disclose. Tell people in your network that are collaborating, not just because it's the right thing to do for the community, but if you clean out all signs of infection and then you're still collaborating with people who are infected, you're just going to get reinfected. So if you don't give them the opportunity to look for signs of compromise and address it, you're hurting yourself in addition to them.
100. Oh my God, great call out. And we are genuinely seeing that. So people they say, oh, for example, I'm automating disclosures now into open source projects that we find PolinRider in. Well, basically, we have an automation thing that goes out there and drops an issue into the GitHub issues for that particular project. What'll happen is they'll see that, then they'll remove it from the GitHub repo, and they won't say anything. They'll close the issue and they won't say anything, right? But then the problem is that somebody inside, one of their contributors and maintainers, or sometimes multiple, will still be infected on their laptops, and the whole thing will just come back. And we've now seen that with some of these open source projects where it started out as 1 or 2 people inside of the contributor group had it, and now they're all infected. It's like COVID, except you can't build up an immunity. You can just get it immediately again, right? So to your point, I think we need to do a lot better at just saying, hey, listen, I got hacked, and here's what we did. We suggest you do the same thing. Here's the things to look for, and reference that great blog post that you put together, PolinRider for developers.
Yeah, thank you. I'll drop that link in the chat. I put together a little incident response remediation guide. This conversation, hold on, I can type and talk at the same time, I swear. This reminds me of, there's 2 kinds of companies, those that have been compromised and those that don't know they've been compromised. I think this is a similar thing. This is spreading widely. It's evolving rapidly. The signals are constantly changing. We're constantly updating our own internal detections because what was reliable weeks or months ago is no longer being used or not being used as widespread. So yeah, I guess this is a plug for having some intel on PolinRider so you know what to look for. But start with the blog that I wrote because it'll at least give you some places to look for.
Excellent advice. I have nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Okay, let's wrap it there.
Sure.
As a heads up to our dedicated listeners, of which there are some, which we love, we are going to take a break next week for a little much needed vacation time / family time on each side. And then we're going to figure out when, how, where to record an episode while we are in Strasbourg. coming up in the first week of, or I guess second week of September. So very much looking forward to another live from the conference, Jenn and Paul talking about what we've been experiencing, learning, etc.
And hopefully I'm not sick this time.
You're not going to be sick this time. You're going to be so healthy.
No, my immune system's all jacked up now. Yeah, just to kind of double click on that, we will be in Europe September 6 to 11. And
7
I'm actually,
to 10. If
I'll
you're
be
in
there
Australia,
until
it's the 6th through the 11th. Yeah. Oh, sorry. The conference
No,
is the 7th.
yeah, I'm also going to be, I'm going to be there September 11 too as well. I'm actually talking at, I'm giving training on GitHub CTI stuff at Frankfurt B-Sides on the 11th. I'm having dinner with some friends the night before, so I'm really looking forward to this. So yeah, if you're going to be in Frankfurt or Strasbourg for whatever reason, let us know. We have a lot of users in Europe. So we have a disproportionate number of OSM users in Europe. So come out and say hi.
On that note, have a good one.